Welcome to the Flower Farm Sampler Quilt-Along series. I'm Shelley Kavana, author of the Flower Farm Sampler book, and it's my mission to help you make stunning quilts simply. If we haven't met before, I'm a quilt pattern and cross-stitch designer. I design fabric and I write quilting books like the Barnstar Sampler and the Flower Farm Sampler. You can find my patterns, fabrics, and books at your favorite local quilt shop, or you can find them online at our website at horasquilts.com. You can also follow our quilty adventures on social media under the tag @HorasQuilts. In our Flower Farm Sampler Quilt-Along series, we'll be working through all 18 blocks from my Flower Farm Sampler book, spread out over 12 months. To sew along with us, you'll need your fabric and the book. In these videos, also assume that you've prepped and cut your fabric pieces following the book's instructions. To make the blocks in the book, you won't need any specialty rulers, foundation paper piecing, or templates. Most of the blocks use my favorite stitch and flip techniques to create complex geometric designs with simple shapes. A few of our blocks do include triangles, which will piece oversized and trimmed down to perfection. All the stitch and flip basics are also covered on pages 10 through 13 of your book, so you'll definitely want to bookmark that section for handy reference. Instead of starting with block 1 and working our way chronologically through the book, we're going to begin with our smaller 8-inch blocks. This way we can practice techniques on a manageable scale before tackling our larger and more complicated blocks. You'll find our complete schedule, my list of must-have and nice-to-have tool recommendations, and a free downloadable block checklist so you can keep track of your progress, all on our Quilt-Along homepage. We've left the link to that in the description box below. Welcome back to our Flower Farm Sampler Quilt-Along. This month we're working on block 15, the tea rose, which you can find on page 41 of your book. I think the tea rose is my favorite block in the entire quilt. And it also just happens to introduce us to a brand new stitch and flip shape, the stitch and flip rectangle. The block itself is very simple. It features a center square surrounded by border pieces. And it's the stitch and flip pieces on these border units that come together to form a lovely swirl that reminds me of a rose unfurling. For this month's block, you're definitely going to want to have some sort of a temporary marking tool on hand, like the Sewline 3-in-1 ceramic pencil we introduced earlier in the series. Also, when working with these stitch and flip rectangles, especially if you're new to making this shape, I also recommend having a washable glue stick on hand. I like the Sewline mini glue stick, but any washable schoolroom glue stick will work as well. You're also going to want to prep your units on a gridded rotary mat with the 45-degree lines marked on it. So if you have one of those, make sure it's nearby as well. And remember, if you are new to stitch and flip rectangles, you're going to want to practice with some scrap fabric first. This is a technique that requires a little bit of careful prep work and alignment, so don't rush. Take your time to practice. Our tea rose block starts with some straightforward piecing to assemble our center row. First, in step 1, we'll sew C rectangles to the left and right edges of an A square. Then in step 2, we'll sew stitch and flip corner units to the upper left and lower right corners. With this block, the E-squares are on opposite corners rather than adjacent corners, and this builds the first part of that swirl. We've practiced our stitch and flip techniques quite a bit in our previous videos, which are all linked on the Quilt Along homepage below, and you can also find the detailed stitch and flip corners tutorial on page 10 of your book. We're simply marking diagonal lines on the wrong sides of our E-squares before placing or pinning them in their opposite corners. Then we stitch on the marked lines, trim the excess fabric to 1/4 inch, and press. When I'm planning out the orders of the blocks that we're going to work through for a quilt along, I always save any blocks with these rectangle units for a little later on in the program, giving everyone a good chance to practice their stitch and flip skills first. I find that a lot of quilters are a little bit intimidated by them. I think just because they look really odd compared to the traditional shapes that we're used to working with. But I promise that with a little bit of careful prep, that these units aren't any harder than anything we've encountered so far. As we're sewing, remember that you can also find the pictorial tutorial for these stitch and flip rectangle units on page 12 of your book if you need to have a reference handy while sewing. As I mentioned earlier, to work on these units, you're definitely going to want your temporary marking tool like the Sewline ceramic pencil on hand, along with a washable glue stick for glue basting, and we're going to be assembling our units on top of a rotary mat with the diagonal lines marked. I think I've probably made tens of thousands of these stitch and flip rectangle units over the years, and I've experimented with a lot of different methods. And I always come back to this combination of glue basting and setting up my blocks using my cutting mat and the diagonal lines on the mat for accurately marking my stitching lines. So to start, I have the D rectangle placed longwise on the cutting mat, and I'm going to add a small dab of washable glue to the upper right corner. Now you want to keep the glue in the corner. You don't want it to cross over your seam line. And just to note, because we're glue basting, we're not going to be able to repurpose these triangle trimmings. They're pretty small anyways, but if that bothers you, you might want to use a pin instead. After gluing, you'll place your B rectangle at the right end of the D rectangle. You want to position it at a perpendicular angle or tall-wise, with the B rectangle extending down beyond the bottom of the D rectangle. And just take the care to line up your corners as neatly as you can and kind of press that little glued area into place so that your fabric won't shift around as you make your marks. So here's where the rotary mat becomes an invaluable tool. You're going to line up the bottom edge of that D rectangle, that's the one in back, with one of the horizontal lines on the mat. And then you're going to kind of slide the unit until the upper left corner of your B rectangle, the top rectangle, lines up with the 45-degree mark on the mat. So now, even though we can't see exactly where the lower right corner of that D background rectangle is, because it's hidden, we can use the diagonal mark on the mat to locate it precisely. So as you're making your marks, remember that the number one mistake people make with these stitch and flip units is lining up their rulers with their corners, or in this case, the diagonal line on their mat. So remember, for maximum accuracy, that you want to position your pencil tip first, not your ruler edge, with your corners, and then mark your line. This way, you're ensuring that your stitching line is going from corner to corner of your fabric. Marking the stitching lines is the hardest part of making this unit. So once you're past that, you're ready to sew. And just like all of our other stitch and flip units, you're simply stitching on the marked line. You can also chain piece by taking a couple of stitches beyond the edge of the block, and then immediately starting to sew your next unit without clipping your thread in between. After sewing, just trim the excess corner fabric 1/4 inch away from your seam line, And you can do this by hand or with your rotary ruler and cutter, whatever feels the most comfortable for you. And as you press, you do want to take care to try and keep the top and bottom edges of the block as evenly aligned as possible. These units do have the natural tendency to bow a little bit, so just try and keep the edges as straight as possible as you press. If you do end up with a unit that has a tiny bit of a smile shape to it, you will most likely be able to ease the edges back into place as you join this unit to its neighboring block. In step 4, we'll sew the rectangle units we just made to the top and bottom edges of our center unit. Be sure to use the images in the book to help orient the angle of the rectangle units correctly. And do take the time to practice your precision pinning by lining up the seams where the rectangle units meet that center yellow square. Finally, in step 5, we'll sew stitch and flip F squares to all 4 corners, which builds out the background of our block. You'll need to make a total of 12 T-rose blocks for the quilt top. If you're sewing with fabric from one of our quilt kits or our Block of the Month programs, then you'll be making 2 sets of identical blocks. The first set uses those lighter berry tones, and the second set uses the dark aubergine prints. If you're sewing with fabric from your stash, you can mix in as many different prints as you'd like. I would just recommend keeping the same ratio of 6 light blocks and 6 dark blocks so that the colors are balanced in your finished quilt top. And there you have it. You have completed your T-rose block. This month, you've mastered the art of the stitch and flip rectangle, which is a game-changing technique. It'll serve you throughout your quilting journey, and it will open up some incredible quilty design possibilities. We'll see you back here next month when we'll be tackling blocks 4 and 5, which are the primrose and dahlia blocks. Both are beautiful 16-inch blocks that will give us the chance to practice these stitch and flip skills in a larger block setting. I think you're going to love them. We'll see you next month. Thanks so much for sewing along with me today. You can post your photos in our Flower Farm Sampler Quilt Along Facebook group or on Instagram and Blue Sky using hashtag Flower Farm Sampler. And be sure to tag us at Chorus Quilts so that we can see your beautiful work too. Don't forget to grab your free Flower Farm Sampler checklist. You can find the link for the free download in the description box below. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more quilting videos. Hit the bell icon for notifications when we post new tutorials. Happy sewing, and we'll see you next time with another Flower Farm Sampler block.